Hello, my name is Awaiting Dawn, and this is hopefully the first episode of a series where we, in the words of High Wraith, pretend that people care to know how our songs are made and break down a track, from its inspirations to its execution. What inspired this remix was really the combination of Amalek's original track and the poem An Odd Feeling by Nullus. So I think we need to look at that first before we can go into the, depth of the track here.
A rhythmic, mechanical hum of cold steel air gnawing at his spirit like a greedy rat. His ecology gauged by levels of despair. These miracles of frivolous convenience have made him lazy, flaccid, indifferent, and fat. He trudges along a useless destination, mimicking the movements of others at his side. These lurking suspicions of alienation, this relentless humming, hammering at his mind in some obscure cubicle where he feels no pride.
Okay, so these first two stanzas of Nullus's poem were really what inspired a lot of the atmosphere of, what I was trying to create as a remix, especially a few lines like this, the imagery of these, sound that would kind of wear on your mind, of a sort of this modernity that might wear at your mind and your soul and everything. These two stanzas, I think, are perfect examples of that type of atmosphere. And I really wanted to create that in music, where, let me show you.
Hum of cold steel air.
See, where Amalek uses strings and piano, I really wanted to add more of that, relentless humming, that sort of modern and distorted sound that might, be irritating, it simulates this mechanical hum or, some sort of noise that would be affecting the mind of the subject of this poem. Let me show you what I did at the very beginning here. So the first thing you'll notice at the very beginning of the track is this background noise. And I thought this was really cool because it's mainly a manipulated, an ambient sound that's been manipulated and harshened here. So if I get rid of this effect rack here, it's almost calming. Maybe it feels kind of empty. That's why I started with this to begin with, is it's the kind of empty sound that feels like a cave almost. But I really wanted to get something harsh and distorted to get the atmosphere right. So, let's see, I started with this resonator, which is a really interesting thing where it takes the original sound and adds a pitch to it. So of course I started with the key of the song, that's A sharp or B flat, and then I wanted to get a really dissonant sound to it. So I have the tritone here, that's +6, an octave, and then one half step above the octave, and then a half step above the upper octave there. And so this on its own makes a pretty, dissonant chord. And then I added this overdrive that just makes it more distorted. And then this little auto pan just adds rhythm and makes it modulate the volume. And so this is the first kind of thing your ears hear in this song. And this is kind of distorted background noise, rhythmic. I was trying to get that rhythmic and mechanical almost sounding, like this is like a background hum that would be going on in the poem. Continuing with the atmosphere of the song, I also just have this FX guitar track where it's just, I have some distortion on it, now it's just doing noises, basically. This is just me, scraping at the strings with some reverb and a lot of distortion on it, and just trying to get a harsh sound. And there's this one clip that I have in this channel here that was especially distorted. It's in the left ear now. That one clip was just such the perfect distorted sound to simulate that sort of thing that Nullis mentioned in his poem, the harsh sound that might wear at the mind. Now, writing-wise, I also changed a lot compared to Amalek's original. Now, you'll notice I use piano here, but the writing's completely different. This is a 1 to flat 2 progression, which is, of course, not in a normal key of minor or whatever Amalek did, because Amalek's progression would have been A flat to B flat, which it was good, but I wanted to go for a different feel, and alternating to the flat second was really the touch of dissonance that I wanted to go for, especially along with the distortion that you can hear on the piano. And it gets even more distorted the further along in the song we go. And now finally I want to talk about the narration and what I did to implement it.
An odd feeling.
See, as you can hear, the reading by Nullis sounds pretty good. Sounded pretty good on its own, but you'll hear that I have a lot of effects on it, but you probably wouldn't notice just how many effects I have on it unless I solo it, so let me show you.
A rhythmic, mechanical hum of cold steel air, gnawing at his spirit like a greedy rat. His ecology gauged by levels of despair. These miracles of frivolous convenience.
So you can hear a delay on there and some distortion and some stuff like that is pretty obvious. But let me show you one thing that I think is an interesting touch. You see this delay here? It's not a normal delay. You can see the time is 8 milliseconds. It's super short and there's no feedback. So basically what happens is the signal goes in and it plays out the left ear, and then 8 milliseconds later it plays out the right ear because it's on ping pong mode. And let me show you the difference here.
Mechanical hum of cold steel air,
if I disable it, it sounds very centered. It's in the center of the panning. But by adding this delay, it feels like it's on both sides of your ears than in the middle, you know? And I thought that was pretty important to implement it. Also, an interesting touch on the voice was this second channel you see. There's this first channel that is a normal version of his voice. But listen to this. It's soft right here in this part, but there's an octaved down, distorted version of his narration that's on this second channel. And let me show you what that sounds like in this last bit, because I've automated the volume to where it gets louder when it needs to be loud. So it builds up here at the end to signal the transition into the distorted section. And this is, this is literally a guitar amp sim that I'm using, and I'm putting it on his voice, and it just adds this distortion and depth, I think, to the overall voice, where it just makes his voice sound a lot more deep and has a lot more power in that word pride, because it kind of needed a lot of power, because that's also the first hit of all the drums and guitar. So now's a good time to talk about the guitars. This is a simple double-tracked guitar that it took me a little bit to practice all these parts because they're pretty complicated. But, I mean, the guitar track is super simple. It just has a gate. There's this amp sim I'm using, Bias Effects 2, with a compressor. This is a compressor on there. And overall, it's pretty simple. I also wanted to show you the glitch effects that go right here. This is, literally me taking a clip of the existing part and repeating it really fast to get a glitch effect. And of course, I pitched it up a lot to get that dissonant sound. The writing of the more basic bass parts and guitar parts is also different, you'll notice from the original. Let me play you. This is the original. So the most prime example is this bit. This is the bass part of the original track, which is pretty good, but adapting it to guitar sounds pretty weird, even though it sounds good in Amalek's original track. I wanted to go for something that sounded a bit more metal, so I tried to keep the original feel, but went more dissonant using here is the minor second, and here's the tritone. Let me play you the bass part. This is a synth bass I'm using, but let me show you how I wrote the bass part. So I kept, you'll notice this slide was in the original, and this octave jump, it's not an octave jump anymore. I moved it to an octave and 1/2 step jump. So you'll notice I'm trying to keep the original feel of Amalek's track, but I'm adding some touches to make it sound a bit more heavy, a bit more dissonant, and things like that. I also want to touch on another piece of inspiration that I took from Amalek's original track, and that's something that he did here. So it's hard to notice, but you'll notice that the groove of this measure changes halfway through, where the first half is a triplet groove and the second is straight. If you listen to what the kick drum does. Here, let me play it again for you. So the kick drum plays here on a triplet and here on a eighth note. Let me show you with a metronome to show you how that actually changes. So you can hear in this first measure it syncs up with a triplet, and the second it syncs up with the straight metronome. And I really love that sort of thing when it comes to rhythms, switching between a triplet and straight beat. So I really, really wanted to do that with my parts as well. So I basically did that with all the drum parts, where I have triplets here and then also adding in straight parts. See, I even kind of replicated this measure because synced up from the beginning, this measure here syncs up with, of course, this one, and this is the drum part. This part is synced up to the triplet grid, you'll see. These kick hits are on the triplet grid, and then these ones are not. So I basically tried to replicate that whole rhythmic concept throughout the loud portions of this song. Even though I took some liberties with the writing on this, it's all based on Amalek's original track. I want to show you one example of that, of how I would adapt one part of his track. Here's the original here.
Vigorous zeal encapsulated in
So
one
this is a
word.
transition to a verse here. And that rhythm there I thought was really powerful, so I definitely wanted to add that into my version. So here's what I adapted it into. So right there's a really interesting transition where it goes again from triplets to a straight groove. Let me show you that. And the narration sounds really cool with it as well. I did have to warp and cut the narration in order to actually fit it into the track most of the time, because it's just not really feasible to write around the original recording. And of course, Nullis has recorded this reading, long before I decided to make the track. So I did warp and cut and stuff and tried to make it feel as natural as possible, and I think I really succeeded, especially in this verse where it flows pretty well. Now, one more very important thing is this FX bass, which is something you really notice when it's gone. So I'm going to play you this last chorus section and toggle it and show you what that sounds like. So do you hear the difference there? The difference is that this FX bass adds not only a lot of high ends, but a lot of just extra noise sounds, like in the original track here. Amalek has a lot of bright, like, effects sounds and other things in the synths that he uses. And it adds a lot of brightness to the track, a lot of distortion, and I really wanted to keep that feel. Let me show you what the FX bass sounds like. So, I mean, it doesn't make much sense on its own, because it's meant to play with the guitar and the synth bass to add some rhythmic complexity as well as that actual tonal depth, I think, that it adds by adding that high end to contrast with the kind of dark, by comparison, bass and guitar. Let me show you them together here. So, I mean, I thought that was a very important element, not only because it adds the high end, but because it adds this sort of chaos that is very present in the original track that I really needed to get in there, because without it, there's not really that chaos element. Let me show you. Which that sounds pretty good, but adding the FX bass really gives it that extra touch of chaos. So this last bit is something, it wasn't in the original track, but it's something I really wanted to add because this whole song felt like it needed a climactic last chorus. So in this section, I really strayed away from how the rest of the writing was in the song, because the entire rest of the song, if you just look at the bass part, it's all, this is the tonic, and then there's the flat 2, and then maybe tritone, maybe an octave up, but it's all around the tonic and the flat 2, which is basically the whole progression of the song, just, based on how the feel of it is supposed to be. It didn't really have a chord progression as much as it did a rhythmic and bass pattern. But this time I think it was important to change chords to basically signify that things are changing at the end, because not only am I trying to remix Amalek's track, but I'm also trying to tell the story of Nullus's poem. So I wanted to signify something had changed at the end by making this last bit very different and very climactic. So one thing to notice about this part is that this is a different chord, of course. It's a flat, but this rhythm is borrowed from another part of the song. So if you remember that rhythm, I talked about it earlier, and it's this one. So I thought it was pretty cool to take that and basically have it in a different feeling section here. This next part is also pretty important. So, if you recognize that rhythm, it is actually over here in this in this middle section here. It's also from this middle section. And in this middle section, it is on the flat 2, which is, of course, this, it's a weird chord change, and it's on the more dissonant note here. So I thought it'd be interesting to have it be on the tonic this time, being completely different than how it was before. And, the feel of it is really final when you have it in this moment here. And this last chord is also really important, because you see this is the classic flat 2 note that it goes from tonic to flat 2, but this time I didn't want it to feel dissonant. I wanted to really lean into the beauty that's possible with the flat 2, which you wouldn't really think it, because it's it's a half step above the tonic, and that interval is not it's not pretty. But if you'll notice this pad part, which you don't really, it's not that loud, so you don't really notice it, but it really helps contextualize this last ending chord, because while it is the flat 2, this chord you'll notice here is a major 7 sus2. So it's a really pretty chord with a really pretty synth here that I'm adding on, even though the flat 2 is supposed to be a dissonant note. I really wanted to show how beautiful the flat 2 could be, not only because this chord is just a really beautiful chord, but because it sets up the ending really well as a release of all the tension that's happened throughout this entire song. Let me play you the ending. And now this piano, it's much less distorted, and it's also not dissonant at all. And so this ending, I think, really wanted to signify the conclusion of this story that's been told through Nollis's poem. And this is where I think the difference between the original and what I did is basically signified in one moment, where at the end of Amalek's track has this, it's kind of dissonant and out of tune piano here. That's the last note there is, it fits really well with Amalek's original track. And then after that, of course, Nollis writes his poem, and Nollis's poem has a really great story about awakening, and this conclusion was something that I wanted to lean into the resolved nature of that. So that's why I changed that last one to be way less dissonant and to be more beautiful piano, rather than keeping the dissonance through the entire song. So overall, this track was really an exploration of basically the story that I could create using Nollis's poem and Amalek's song as inspiration. And both of them, they're really inspiring to me, because these works are really great both on their own, the poem and the original track. But I think together they had such a distinct sort of image in my head that I really had to make this remix, because it was such an interesting thing to explore all the ideas that they evoked. And I really have to pay respect to Amalek and Nollis, because they're both really great at what they do. So that wraps up basically what's the first episode of what's hopefully going to be a series. And This video is mainly a proof of concept, and hopefully it becomes something where we can take someone else's track other than my own, and I can have a conversation with them, and we can just basically break down all the inspiration and the little things they did that they wanted people to know, and basically everything kind of like what I did. So if you wanted to potentially have one of your songs analyzed, we could have a conversation about that. You know, we could record that and look at anything you wanted about your song, just to try to break down everything that inspired you and the little touches that you did in your song that no one might have noticed. I would love to do that. So make sure to contact me if you're interested. I'm on Twitter. It's just at awaitingdawn_. So you can send me a DM and I'll check it. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed and have a good day.